The wedding invitation had not been meant for her. Claire Mercer found that out the hard way, standing in the parking lot of a Walgreens at 7 in the morning, squinting at the society page on her phone while a stranger's sprinkler arced lazily across the sidewalk behind her. The photo was crisp and professionally lit. Marcus Hale, 38, jaw squared, suit charcoal and impeccable, his arm around a woman whose smile belonged on the cover of something expensive. Marcus Hale, founder of Hale Capital Group, to wed Vanessa Whitmore, daughter of financier Robert Whitmore, in a private ceremony at the Alderton estate. Private. 300 guests. Claire had learned long ago that Marcus's definition of private meant only the people who matter. She was 7 months pregnant. She had not mattered for a while. She put the phone in her jacket pocket and went inside to buy prenatal vitamins and a bottle of orange juice because the baby needed those things whether the world was fair or not. The apartment she rented was on the 3rd floor of a building in Clarksburg, Maryland, that smelled faintly of other people's cooking and old carpet. It was not a bad apartment. It had good light in the mornings, a window above the kitchen sink that looked out over a row of Bradford pear trees, and a landlord who fixed things when she asked. She had decorated it in the way people decorate places. They are not sure they will stay. A few framed prints, leaning against walls instead of hung. Boxes not fully unpacked. A second-hand rocking chair she had bought for the nursery, positioned in the corner of the bedroom, like a question she had not answered yet. Claire worked 4 days a week at a print shop 2 miles away. She operated the large format press, handled custom orders, proofed layouts before they went to clients. It was precise work. She was good at it. Her boss, a heavy-set man named Phil who wore the same green vest every day and asked no personal questions, had told her she could move to full-time after the baby came if she wanted, and she had said she would think about it, which was the closest she ever got to planning ahead anymore. She was 31 years old, and she was not broken. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself, in the mornings before the day got complicated. She was tired and she was careful, and she was sometimes very afraid, but she was not broken. What she feared was not poverty, not even loneliness, exactly. What she feared was the specific kind of story her child might inherit, the kind where a person is told, by the shape of their own history, that they were not wanted before they were even born, that their existence had been something to be managed and minimized and moved away from as efficiently as possible. She had spent months trying to figure out how to rewrite that story. She had not figured it out yet. Marcus had not just left her. She understood that now, in a way, she had not in the first weeks after he filed. He had constructed his exit the way he constructed everything, methodically, with attention to detail, and with the specific goal of leaving nothing behind that could be used against him. The divorce had been swift and strange. Her attorney, a tired man who handled mostly uncontested cases, had flagged certain inconsistencies in the financial disclosures, but told her the cost of pursuing them would likely exceed whatever they recovered. She had signed the papers in a conference room that smelled like old coffee and driven home in silence. She had tried not to think about it too hard after that. She had tried to move forward. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday evening, 3 days before the wedding. She almost did not pick it up. It was lying flat on the doormat when she got home from work. No postage, no return address, just her name written in block letters with a blue ballpoint pen. Claire Mercer. She stood in the hallway for a moment, grocery bag in one arm, keys still in her hand, looking at it the way you look at something you do not entirely trust. Inside was a folded sheaf of documents, 8 pages, photocopied, slightly off-center the way things are when someone is copying in a hurry or in secret. There was also a small note card. 4 words, printed in the same careful block letters. He won't stop here. She sat down at the kitchen table and read. It took her 40 minutes to get through all of it. Not because the language was complex, but because she kept stopping. The documents included wire transfer records, internal ledger entries, a series of transactions dated across a 4-month window, beginning 18 months ago, the same window during which Marcus had first mentioned wanting to restructure their assets before the divorce proceedings began. The transfers moved money from their joint accounts and 2 shared investment vehicles into a limited liability company she had never heard of. Harlan Properties LLC, incorporated in Delaware, sole registered agent listed as a law firm she did not recognize. By the time the assets reached Harlan Properties, they were no longer marital assets. They were a private company's holdings. And when Marcus filed his financial disclosure with the court, Harlan Properties appeared nowhere on it. The last 2 pages were different from the rest. They were not financial records. They were internal correspondence emails, printed out between Marcus and someone referred to only as R.W., discussing the timeline for the Whitmore engagement and the importance of ensuring the prior situation is fully resolved before the announcement. There was also a single line in one email that made her breath catch. The child is not a factor in the long-term arrangement. That matter is being handled separately. She put the pages down. She looked at the Bradford pear trees outside the window. It was full dark now. The streetlights made the new spring leaves look pale yellow, almost silver. She sat there for a long time. She was not angry. Not exactly. What she felt was something quieter than anger and more durable, a slow, cold settling of understanding, the way water finds its level. She had known, in some unspoken part of herself, that the financial picture had been wrong. She had let herself be talked out of pursuing it, because pursuing it was expensive and exhausting, and she was already exhausted. She had told herself that letting go was a form of self-preservation, that silence was survivable. But the child is not a factor in the long-term arrangement was not something she could fold up and put away. She picked up the note card again. He won't stop here. Someone had wanted her to know. Someone had taken a risk to make sure of it. She did not know who. She did not know why now, 3 days before the wedding, with what felt like very little time to do anything useful with what she had been given. But she thought about her daughter. She knew it was a girl, had known since January, and she thought about what it would mean to know, someday, that the truth had existed and her mother had chosen to leave it in a drawer. She did not sleep much that night. By morning, something in her had gone very quiet and very clear. She would go to the wedding, not to make a scene, not to beg, not to hold a sign or scream accusations at the altar. She would go because she needed to see it with her own eyes, needed to stand in the same room as Marcus Hale and know, without any doubt, whether she was prepared to finally stop letting him be the only one who got to tell the story. She ironed her blue dress, the only one that still fit over her belly. She pressed it carefully, hung it on the back of the bathroom door, and went to work. The Alderton estate sat 20 minutes outside the city on a private road lined with oak trees old enough to have shaded carriages. The estate had been built in 1887, renovated 3 times, and now operated as a luxury event venue that advertised itself as the Mid-Atlantic's premier backdrop for milestone celebrations. The photos on the website showed manicured hedgerows, a grand staircase of pale limestone, and a ballroom whose chandeliers cast the kind of golden light that made everyone in it look like the best version of themselves. She parked on the far edge of the overflow lot, where the gravel thinned out and the shade was thicker. The late afternoon light came through the windshield at a low angle and warmed the left side of her face. She reached into her bag and checked the envelope. Still there. She had transferred the documents into a clean white envelope of her own, sealed it, and written nothing on the outside. It sat between her wallet and a small bottle of water like it was nothing remarkable. She got out of the car. The woman at the guest registration table had the practiced smile of someone who had been trained to be welcoming without being warm. She looked at Claire the way people look at things that do not immediately compute. "Name?" she said. "Claire Mercer." A pause. The woman scrolled. "I don't see. I'm a +1. Derek Lowe's guest. He said he would leave my name." Another pause. The woman found something on her screen, compared it, and seemed to decide that this was not her problem to solve. She handed Claire a small card with a table number printed on it in gold ink, Table 19, and gestured toward the entrance. "Enjoy the celebration." Claire walked through the doors. The ballroom was everything the website had promised, and a few things it had not. It was larger than it looked in photographs, the kind of space that swallowed sound and returned it softened, like being inside something that had learned long ago how to absorb disruption. The chandeliers were lit, their light falling evenly over 200 white chairs arranged in perfect rows, over tall floral arrangements of ivory and pale gold, over the polished limestone floor that reflected everything back at half brightness, like a lake on a still day. The guests moved through the space in clusters, men in dark suits, women in silk and structured linen. Conversations conducted at a volume calibrated for discretion. Claire recognized the social register of it instantly. She had existed at the edge of this world for 4 years, close enough to learn its grammar without ever becoming fluent. You did not raise your voice. You did not arrive visibly emotional. You wore your composure the way you wore your clothing as a signal of exactly how much you belonged. She found table 19 near the back, partially screened by a column wound with greenery. She set her bag on the chair beside her and stood rather than sitting, because sitting felt like surrendering something she was not ready to surrender. She found Marcus almost immediately. He was near the front of the room, flanked by 2 men she did not recognize, laughing at something one of them had said. He wore a charcoal suit and his hair was shorter than she remembered. He looked exactly like the photograph from the society page. He looked like a man who had made every right decision and arrived at the precise destination he had intended. She watched him for a long moment and waited to feel something catastrophic. The grief, or the rage, or the specific humiliation of being the woman he had discarded standing 40 feet away from the altar he had built with someone else. What she felt instead was a kind of stillness, like the moment before a weather system arrives, when the air goes flat and the birds stop. She understood what that stillness meant. It meant she had already decided. She just had not acted yet. The ceremony began at 5 o'clock. Vanessa Whitmore came down the aisle on her father's arm, and Claire watched her the way you watch someone you are trying to understand rather than judge. She was genuinely beautiful, tall, measured in her movements, with dark hair pinned up and a dress that had clearly been made for her body specifically. But it was her eyes that caught Claire's attention. They were bright and composed and performing the correct emotions in the correct sequence. And underneath all of that there was something that Claire recognized from mirrors, a careful vigilance. The look of a person who has learned to monitor the room even while the room is supposed to be watching her. She was not entirely happy. She was working very hard at it, which was not the same thing. Robert Whitmore, walking beside his daughter, had the bearing of a man who had spent 50 years being the most important person in every room he entered. He was silver-haired and broad-shouldered, and he watched Marcus at the altar with an expression that was approving in the way that investments are approving, assessed, valued, committed to, for now. The officiant spoke. The vows were written, not traditional, composed and specific in the way things are when someone has paid attention to the optics of sincerity. Marcus's voice was steady when he delivered his. Vanessa's was too, almost. There was a half-second hesitation before I do that probably no one else heard. Claire heard it. The reception began at 6:30. Champagne appeared. The string quartet gave way to a 4-piece band that opened with something low and celebratory. People began to move and talk and exist inside the version of the evening they had come here to inhabit. Claire moved carefully. She stayed near the edges of the room, kept her expression neutral, accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. She was aware of glances, some curious, some confused, a few with the particular quality of recognition from people who had met her once at some function and were now recalibrating what they thought they knew. She gave none of them an opening. She was on her second circuit of the room's perimeter when she heard it. 2 men, partially visible behind a tall floral arrangement near the service corridor, speaking in the lowered tones of people who believe they are not being overheard. One she did not recognize. The other wore a vendor lanyard, not the first time. Jenna in accounting flagged it 6 months ago, and he had her moved to a different division before she could finish the report. Robert doesn't know the full picture, that's all I'm saying. They moved away before she could hear more. She stood very still behind the column of flowers and breathed. Robert doesn't know the full picture. She thought about the documents in her envelope. She thought about the number, $340,000, moved quietly in the dark, and a wedding financed by debt structured under Vanessa's name. She thought about Vanessa's half-second hesitation before I do. She was still reorganizing her thoughts when a man in a gray suit appeared at her elbow. He was in his late 50s, compact, careful in his movements, with the look of someone who had spent a long time learning to exist without calling attention to himself. He held a glass of water, not champagne, and he did not look at her directly when he spoke. "Miss Mercer," he said quietly, "I'm Derek Lowe." She turned her head slowly. You sent the envelope. I did. His eyes moved across the room in small, deliberate arcs. I was Marcus's internal comptroller for 6 years. He terminated me in January. Restructuring, he called it. A brief pause. I put your name on my guest list 3 days ago. After I sent the envelope, I wanted to make sure you had a way in if you decided to come. He paused again. What's in that envelope is accurate. Every number, every transfer. I have the originals. If you need someone to stand behind what's in there, I will. Why? She said. He was quiet for a moment. Because I watched him do it. And because I have a daughter about the age you were when you met him. He finally looked at her a quick, direct glance, then away again. He's already spoken to a family law attorney about the parental rights question. He wants the record to show he acted first. Claire absorbed this without letting it show on her face. When did you find that out? Last week. She nodded once. I'll be here until 8. Table 11. He adjusted his jacket lapel and walked away without looking back. Claire stood alone in the warm golden light of the ballroom. 300 people moving around her like water around a stone. She put her hand briefly against the side of her bag where the envelope rested. Her daughter moved inside her a slow, rolling shift, an elbow or a knee, patient and constant. The band played on. Marcus laughed at something across the room. The chandeliers burned. He crossed the room in no particular hurry. That was deliberate. Moving fast would have signaled alarm. Moving slowly signaled control. He stopped to exchange a few words with a couple near the bar, touched a groomsman on the shoulder, accepted congratulations from a silver-haired woman with a pearl necklace, all while closing the distance between himself and Claire at a pace designed to look like coincidence. By the time he reached her, she had already decided how she was going to stand. Weight even on both feet. Bag close against her side. Nothing in her hands to fidget with. Claire. He said her name, the way you say the name of something you are surprised to find in an unexpected place, not warmly, but with a performance of warmth laid over the top of something considerably less generous. I didn't know you were coming. Hello, Marcus. He glanced at her stomach. A quick look, like touching a bruise to see if it still hurt. You look. He stopped, recalibrated. How are you feeling? Fine, she said. Congratulations on the wedding. Something moved through his eyes. He had expected tears, maybe, or rage, or the particular brittle quality of someone who had spent months holding themselves together and was close to the point of cracking. What he had not expected was the thing she was giving him, which was nothing, a surface with no purchase. A door with no handle. This isn't really the place for you, he said, and the warmth in his voice dropped 2 degrees. I think you understand that. I was invited. By whom? Derek Lowe. A pause, brief and well-controlled, but she caught it. Derek doesn't have standing to bring guests. And yet here I am, Claire said, at table 19, with a place card and everything. His jaw shifted. She had seen that jaw shift before. It was what happened when he was recalculating and did not want anyone to see him doing it. He looked away, buying himself 3 seconds, then looked back. I hope you enjoy the evening, he said, with a finality designed to close the conversation. I'm sure I will, she said. He left. She exhaled slowly through her nose and did not watch him go. He came back 40 minutes later. This time, he brought the social weight of 3 well-dressed couples who had drifted naturally into his orbit and now stood within clear earshot, close enough to serve as an audience without technically being one. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. He said it at a volume slightly above what the conversation required. Not shouting, but calibrated, enough to carry. Claire looked at him without moving. I haven't done anything. Your being here is disruptive. He gestured at the room. This is my wedding, my guests, my family, and you showing up to create a situation. I haven't created any situation. To make this about you and your circumstances is not something I'm going to allow. She heard someone nearby draw a small, sharp breath. Not at her, at him. She filed it away. I've been sitting at my table, Claire said. I've been watching your wedding. I haven't said anything to anyone. Your presence is the situation. Then that's a problem with how you feel about me, not with anything I've done. His face changed. She recognized the change, had seen it twice before in their marriage. Both times before something happened that she later wished she could have prevented. It was the expression of a man who had decided that rational management was no longer efficient and that something more direct was required. "You need to leave," he said, and now there was no warmth at all. "I don't want you here. I don't want your child here. You are not a part of my life. You are not a part of this family, and whatever you think you're going to accomplish by standing here, I'm not looking at you any particular way," she said. "You are not going to accomplish it. You lost. Do you understand that? Whatever you came here hoping for, it's over. It was over before you walked in that door." "Marcus," she said quietly, "I think you should go back to your wife." She had known it might be the wrong thing to say, and she had said it anyway, because it was the true thing and she was tired of calibrating every syllable to manage his reactions. She watched the word wife land, watched him absorb what it implied that Vanessa was across the room, that this conversation was visible, that the longer it went on the more it looked like exactly what it was. And she watched him make the choice. He reached for her, not her arm, not a grip meant to steer or restrain. He took a handful of her dress, the blue fabric at her hip, where the seam ran, and he pulled. The sound was very small for something that changed everything. A brief, clean tearing, not loud, but in the particular acoustic of that room, with the band between songs and the conversations lulled, it carried everywhere. The fabric split from hip to mid-thigh. Claire staggered one step sideways, caught herself against the edge of a nearby table, and stood. Across the room, Vanessa Whitmore went completely still. She set her champagne glass down on the nearest table, a slow, deliberate movement, as though she needed her hands free for whatever came next. Her eyes moved from Marcus to Claire and back, and something in her face that had been carefully arranged for the entire evening came quietly apart. For a moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4, no one moved. No one spoke. The chandelier light poured down over 300 people standing completely still, glasses arrested halfway to mouths, the band members looking up from their instruments with expressions of pure, unprocessed confusion. Marcus stood with a fold of blue fabric still in his hand. Claire stood with her dress torn, her belly visible beneath the gap in the fabric, both hands braced against the table behind her. She thought of her daughter, the slow, rolling presence of her, patient and constant all evening while the world outside did what the world does. She straightened. She took her hands off the table. A young man in a white catering uniform appeared at her side. He said nothing. He unfolded the large white linen napkin draped over his forearm and held it out to her with both hands, a small, deliberate gesture, careful and quiet. She took it, wrapped it around her waist, tied it at her hip. Then he crossed to the nearby MC table, picked up the wireless microphone that had been resting there since the dinner service ended, and placed it in her hand with the same wordless, matter-of-fact steadiness, as if this were simply the next logical step. He met her eyes briefly, gave a single, small nod, and stepped back. She looked down at the microphone. She looked back up at the room. 300 people looked back. Marcus had not moved. He was still holding the piece of her dress. He seemed, for the first time she could remember, to have run out of things to say. She stepped forward. She did not rush. That was the first thing people would remember afterward, not the words themselves, not even the documents, but the pace of her. The way she moved toward the center of the room without urgency, without performance, as though she had all the time in the world and had simply decided to use some of it here. In a space built for spectacle, her deliberateness was the most disruptive thing possible. She stopped at the edge of the dance floor. She raised the microphone. "I'm not going to take long," she said. Her voice came back to her from the room's high ceiling, cleaner and steadier than she had expected. It sounded like her, like the version of herself that existed before any of this, and also like something that had grown up on the other side of it. "My name is Claire Mercer. Some of you know who I am. Most of you probably know enough." She paused. "I was married to Marcus Hale for 4 years. We divorced 8 months ago. I am currently 7 months pregnant with his child." A sound moved through the room, not a gasp exactly, more like the collective adjustment of 300 people repositioning their understanding of the evening. She did not wait for it to settle. "I'm not here to cause a scene. I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm here because 3 days ago, I received documents that I believe the people in this room have a right to know exist." She reached into her bag and removed the envelope, opened it. held the papers so the room could see she was holding something real. "I'm going to tell you what they say, and then I'm going to leave." Across the room, Marcus moved a shift of weight, the beginning of an intervention. One of his groomsmen put a hand on his arm. Marcus stilled. He stood with his arms at his sides and watched her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not rage, not cold calculation. Something more unguarded than either the look of a man watching the controlled narrative of his life develop a crack he did not know how to repair. She looked at him for one moment. Then she looked back at the room. "Beginning approximately 20 months ago," she said, "Marcus transferred funds from our joint accounts and 2 shared investment vehicles into a limited liability company called Harlan Properties LLC, incorporated in Delaware. The transfers were made over a period of 4 months and totaled approximately $340,000. When Marcus filed his financial disclosure with the court during our divorce proceedings, Harlan Properties did not appear on it. Silence, the complete kind. Those assets were never divided. They were moved before the legal process began, specifically so they would not be subject to division. I have the transfer records. I have the incorporation documents. I have internal ledger entries from the period in question." She paused. "I also have a former employee of Marcus's company who has agreed to verify these documents and provide corroborating records." At table 11, Derek Lowe sat very still, his hands folded on the table in front of him. He did not look around the room. He looked at Claire with the focused attention of someone who has decided, at some cost, to see a thing through. "The second matter," Claire continued, "involves correspondence between Marcus and a third party, discussing the timeline for this wedding. In that correspondence, there is a line that describes our unborn child." As she paused, not for effect but because saying it aloud, in front of 300 people, required something she needed a half-second to locate. "Not a factor in the long-term arrangement. The same correspondence describes steps being taken to address the question of parental rights before I could initiate any legal action of my own." The silence changed quality. It had been the silence of shock, of information being absorbed. Now it became something harder, the silence of judgment beginning to form. Robert Whitmore stood up. He rose from his chair with the slow, particular deliberateness of a man who has been still for as long as he intends to be still. He was not looking at Claire. He was looking at the number she had cited, $340,000, with an expression that had moved entirely beyond the personal into something colder and more specific. "The Harlan Properties account," he said. His voice was not loud, but the room had made itself very quiet on his behalf. "What was the date of incorporation?" Claire looked at the page. "March 14th, 22 months ago." Robert Whitmore looked at Marcus. Something passed between them, the entire architecture of a business relationship being rapidly disassembled. "That's 6 weeks before you came to me about the Whitmore-Hale Development Partnership," he said. "6 weeks before I signed the capital commitment." Marcus said nothing. "I committed $1.2 million to that partnership. You told me the Hale capital accounts were clean. You gave me a disclosure statement." Robert Marcus started. "You gave me a disclosure statement," Robert repeated, and the repetition was not clarification. It was a door closing. Vanessa looked at her father. Then she looked at her husband. Marcus still held the torn piece of blue fabric in his hand, and in the chandelier light, it looked like something he had forgotten. He was carrying a small, damning flag he no longer knew how to put down. She said nothing. She did not need to. The particular quality of her silence said everything that needed saying. Her mother leaned toward her and spoke quietly. Vanessa shook her head once, slowly, and did not look away from Marcus. Around the room, the machinery of consequence was already beginning to turn. 2 men near the bar put down their drinks and moved toward the exit in the unhurried way of people who have a great many phone calls to make. A woman at a corner table opened her evening bag and retrieved her phone. Robert Whitmore was still standing, still looking at Marcus, with the expression of a man revising every decision he had made in the past 2 years simultaneously. The evening that had been designed as a celebration of arrival had become something else entirely. Not a scandal. Scandals are loud and theatrical. This was quieter than that. This was an accounting. Claire lowered the microphone. She folded the documents back into the envelope. tucked it into her bag. She looked once more at Vanessa, not with triumph, not with pity, just a look between two people who now shared a kind of knowledge that could not be undone. She held it for 2 seconds and let herself be looked at and hoped that whatever Vanessa saw was something true. Then she turned toward the exit. The walk to the door was longer than she remembered it being on the way in. Each step on the pale limestone floor, the sound of her heels in the silence, the chandelier light moving over her as she passed beneath it. The crowd parted without her asking, not dramatically the way people move when they sense that someone is passing through a moment that belongs entirely to her. No one spoke to her. One woman older, in a deep green dress, met her eyes briefly as she passed and gave her a look that was not pity and not admiration, but something quieter than either. Recognition. The acknowledgement of one person to another that the world is sometimes exactly as hard as it appears to be, and that enduring it with your spine intact is not a small thing. Claire kept walking. She pushed through the main doors and out into the corridor, down the pale limestone steps, and into the night. The sky was a deep, clear blue-black. The oak trees along the private road were lit from below, their old branches making patterns against the dark. The air was cool and smelled like cut grass and something blooming nearby that she could not name. She stopped at the bottom of the steps and put both hands on her stomach. Her daughter moved the same slow, rolling shift as earlier, unhurried and entirely unconcerned with the events of the last 2 hours. "We're okay," Claire thought. "We're okay, and we're going home." She had been standing there for perhaps 2 minutes when she heard the door open behind her. She waited, listening to the footsteps on the stone, and when they stopped, she turned. It was Derek Lowe. He stood 4 steps above her on the staircase, his gray suit jacket buttoned, his hands in his pockets. He looked like a man who had put down something heavy that he had been carrying for a long time and was still getting used to the absence of the weight. "I wanted to make sure you got out all right," he said. "I'm all right." He nodded. "Robert Whitmore has already called his attorney. There will be an audit. It will not go well for Marcus." He said it without satisfaction, as a simple report of facts. The parental rights matter. He won't be able to pursue that quietly now. It would look like retaliation. His attorneys will tell him to stand down. She looked at him for a moment. "Why did you wait so long? You had these documents for months." He was quiet for a beat. "I kept thinking someone else would act. Someone with more resources, more standing. Someone who would not have to pay the price you just paid to be believed." He looked down at the steps. "I was wrong to wait. I'm sorry for that." She considered this. "You made it right," she said finally. Not as absolution, just as fact, the same way she had been speaking all evening. He gave a small nod. "Take care of yourself, Miss Mercer. You too, Mr. Lowe." He went back up the steps and through the door. She heard it close behind him. She stood alone in the dark, at the bottom of the Alderton Estate steps, in a blue dress with a white linen napkin tied at her hip, and she breathed. The drive home took 23 minutes. She kept the radio off not because she needed silence for thinking, but because she had moved through the far side of thinking into something that felt less like numbness and more like arrival. She wanted to hear the road, the nighttime hum of tires on asphalt, the occasional passage of another car moving in the opposite direction like a thought crossing someone else's mind. She thought about the morning, about Phil's print shop and the large format press, and the way the machine sounded when it found its rhythm on a long run, steady and mechanical and oddly reassuring. She thought about the rocking chair in the corner of the bedroom, still not properly positioned, and she thought that tomorrow she might finally move it to where it was supposed to go. She thought, "Here is what I want you to know. Not when you are old enough to understand documents and financial disclosures and the mechanics of how a person can be quietly erased from their own story. Sooner than that, as soon as you can hear it, you were never not a factor. You were always the whole point." The apartment was exactly as she had left it. The light above the kitchen sink, the Bradford pear trees visible through the window, the rocking chair in the corner still asking its question. She set her bag on the table, took off her shoes, stood in the kitchen in the quiet. Then she went to the bedroom, moved the rocking chair to the corner by the window where it had always been meant to go, and sat down in it. Outside, the Bradford pears were silver in the street light, the same as they had been the night she sat at this table, with 8 pages of documents and 4 words on a note card that changed everything. The city made its quiet nighttime sounds. A dog barked twice somewhere down the block and stopped. She sat in the chair and rocked, slowly, in the dark, both hands resting on her stomach. For the first time in a very long time, she did not feel like someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. She felt like someone who had already picked both shoes up off the floor, set them neatly by the door, and decided to rest. There are people who believe that humiliating someone is the same as defeating them, that if you can make a person small enough in front of enough witnesses, you have won something permanent. What Marcus Hale discovered at his own wedding was the limit of that belief. Claire Mercer did not win because she retaliated. She did not win because 300 people watched and agreed with her. She won because she walked into a room where everything was designed to remind her of what she had lost, and she chose clearly, quietly, and without asking anyone's permission to tell the truth. Dignity is not the absence of damage. It is the decision, made in the worst possible moment, to remain exactly who you are. She had made that decision. And outside the window, the city went on being the city. And inside her, her daughter went on becoming herself. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything.